Thomas Chalmers is probably the greatest practitioner of what we're talking about in Scotland, in the middle of a filthy, dirty city, Glasgow first, Edinburgh second, with his remarkable parish ministry, and he gave such clear instruction on this for the church, and the church practiced it there in such a wonderful way. And it was recognizing that we're to equip godly men and women to meet these needs out in the community and to use their means to do so. And so they would do things like set up schools, not as the church, but through these philanthropists who were members of the church. They would, the bankers who were members of his church, the bankers would set up a means for poor people to have banking accounts and savings accounts. And it wasn't the church doing this. It was the individual men and women. Schools, everything from hospitals to banks to schools, but always the individual members being salt and light in their public sector in which they moved and had influence and could see the needs. Let me just give one reason why it's important to keep this distinction between the church corporate and the church as individuals or as a living organism. That is, I had this question posed to me a few years ago. A church in a very depressed area had need for a building, and they were able to, they located a building on a main street in this little depressed blue-collar town. And so they thought, it's a great storefront, large space, will be visible right here on this main street. And so they went to work to procure this property. Now, here's the phone call came to me. They knew I would like that. They had a building, and it was visible, and it was adequate. But in the upper level of this building, maybe 2 levels above ground level, there were apartments. And so the first thought one of them had was, this thing can pay for itself. We can just rent the apartments.
Sure.
We keep the tenants, rent the apartments, and use that money to, and, we think that way. We live in the business world. Many of our members do. Many of them have to, put together budgets each year for their corporations and their LLCs and what have you. And so the call came, what do you think about that? This seems like a no-brainer. It's going to pay for itself.
It's very prudent, wise, right?
Yeah. I said, well, let me ask you a question. Who's going to administrate this? Who's going to be the collection point? They're going to have to pay the rent to someone. Well, I guess they just bring it down to the church office, or maybe we could have one of the elders do it, or one of the deacons. They were working on establishing a diaconate in this church they'd not had before. And I said, okay, what happens in that scenario? What happens if they don't pay the rent? And what happens if they keep not paying their rent? And you have to go to court to have them evicted. And so the church goes to court, civil court, to have them evicted. And then eviction day comes. Let's just say it runs the course. The eviction day comes, and the appropriate civil magistrate comes and says, okay, let's go in, let's get their stuff and put it out on the street. And now you have the church going up the stairs, having the lock changed, taking these people's belongings down the stairs out to the street for a pickup to come and haul off or something. And so I just paused at that point. And he said, wow.
Mm.
I said, then you go and you tell them that you know they're in trouble, and you know you've been very lenient. You waited, and it's been over a year now, and they've had free space. You're not going to hold them to that. They don't have to pay you back, but they have to move on now. Go be warmed and filled. We'll pray for you.
Yeah, right.
Better than that, why don't you trust in Jesus and get your life straightened up?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I doubt that they would want to listen to us talk about the gospel. I said, yeah, I kind of doubt it too. I said, you know, you've completely confused these people. Are you merciful? You know, do you care? Are you compassionate? You just put me and my children out on the street. So that's just an example of some of the ways that if we don't keep distinctions, what I believe are biblical distinctions between the church, corporate, and individual Christians, we find ourselves much like some of these ministers that I've experienced in my lifetime who get so deeply involved in politics, and they come on to the TV shows and they're interviewed and they're talking about their politics. And on the other hand, they're talking about the gospel. And all of a sudden, a Democrat or Republican doesn't want anything to do with their gospel because they don't agree with their politics. I mean, it happens.
All the time, yeah.
And all of a sudden, we've lost our voice to clearly proclaim the gospel to a people who need that justice first before any other justice matters.